Are you about to take final exams and you're really stressed because the last time you did this you were miserable and you feel like you have to stay up all night? Well, you don't. It's not the problem of the test, it's a problem of your system if you're stressed out and staying up all night. In the next few minutes, I'm gonna help you build a study system that actually works so that you don't have to stress out and you can be stress-free going into your final exams. Hey, my name is Michael Thompson. I'm a husband, youth pastor, and PhD student. On this channel, we discuss how to be a Christian and how to do that with still being effective in your studies and in your professional development. And today, we're talking exactly about how to not stress over studying. So if you're gonna do that, you have to understand where stress comes from. One of the places stress comes from is lack of clarity. You know, a lot of people, they're stressed because they don't actually know what they need to. They know they have this test coming up, but they don't know what it's over. And I used to do this in my classes as well. At this point, when I start a class, even before the class starts, I plan the process of studying for every single test, and then I plan tentative deadlines for all the papers. And I don't stress in my classes anymore, but that wasn't always the case. When I was a bachelor's degree student, I remember sitting in the class, and if you asked me outside the class, what are we learning about? I probably didn't know, and I wasn't maintaining any kind of a system through the semester. So 2 weeks out, I would hear there's a test, and I'd get really, really stressed. And that's just not a great way to live, but you don't have to live that way. You can build a plan, and that plan will create clarity. So lack of clarity, that causes stress. But another thing that causes stress is putting things off, also known as procrastination. This is when you know that you have to do something important and you're able to start, but then you choose not to, even though you know it's gonna hurt you in the future. And when you procrastinate, it leads to overwhelm, and you just feel like you don't really know where to start because there are too many things. And this also creates pressure. And sometimes when you procrastinate, you lean on the pressure of a deadline, and that deadline actually makes you get stuff done, and you think, oh, I'm effective by procrastinating, when that's not really true. You're effective because the deadline is pushing you, and there's pressure which helps, but it also removes your ability to be creative in what you're doing. So whenever you procrastinate, you really don't do things better, although some people lean on the deadline. Stress also comes from bad past experiences. And a lot of you don't hate studying, you just don't like the stress that you feel like comes along with academics. And I notice a lot of the people, they hate school and they don't want to go to school. And if you really ask them why, they like learning. People tend to like learning. They don't like the stress. Well, you can remove that, and a lot of bad past experiences, it's important to remember this: if you put a good study system into place, you're not gonna have those same kind of experiences anymore. You're gonna show up to the test, and there's gonna be 10 minutes before the class starts, and you're not stressed. You're just waiting until the test starts because you know that you've studied to the point where you're ready. And that's a feeling a lot of people don't get, and that's also why a lot of people hate school, because of bad past experiences, because they put things off, you know, they weren't real clear on what they were doing, and so they don't hate learning. They like learning, they just hate the stress, but the stress was more the fact that they didn't have a system. So if stress comes from a bad system, let's fix the system. Well, here you go, here's a plan. If you're going to not be stressed, you need to have a plan for your studying, and you need to plan the right content. You need to know exactly what the test is gonna be over. You don't wanna sit down and start studying and then not have an idea of what the major essay is, and not have an idea, like if the teacher ever starts talking about what the test will be over, you have to write those things down, because if you don't, then you gotta text a classmate, and then this is just adding to the likelihood of you procrastinating because you're not able to just start. You have to get all these things together. You have to find out, okay, what is the test over? What did I miss? And also go to class. Man, that is something that so many college students, they don't do. They skip class, and that really hurts you when it comes time for studying. There's a direct parallel with you showing up and your success on tests. So somebody out there probably just needs to hear this. You need to go to class, and if you do that consistently, that is gonna remove a lot of the stress. And hey, guess what? If you feel sick, if you're actually sick, then don't go and get everyone else sick. But if you're not feeling like it, most of the time you should probably still show up and get the notes and get the content. That way you don't put yourself way behind. So you won't have to guess about your studying. You're gonna have the right content written down and start studying the most important things right away. Whatever the major essay is, whatever the most of the content's gonna be over, start that. Don't start with the easy stuff. And also, when you're studying, don't study the things that you know really well. Start studying the things you don't understand. A lot of students, they kill themselves in this area because they sit down to study, and it feels good to ask yourself a question and be able to give the answer. That feels good, that's great. But the test is gonna have questions that you're ready for, that you already have that handled. if you didn't study again, you'd be ready for that question. Spend your time studying the things that you're not ready for, because then when you show up, you will have spent, if you have 4 hours of study, if you spend 3 of those hours studying things you know already, well then you're not really helping yourself. You need to spend those initial hours studying the things you feel least ready for. If all you ever did was study the things that you don't know, eventually that's going to lead to a lot of success, because you're constantly but it's harder. And that, if we're being honest, that's why a lot of us don't study the things we don't know, because it's harder to go through the mentally rigorous process of learning something that you don't understand. But it's very important. So plan to study the right content. Start with the hardest concepts and the ones that the test is going to be the ones that are valued the most on the test, wherever the most points are, and then work back from there. You also need to make sure that you have the right environment. Where you're studying, man, that makes a huge difference. You need to make sure that you have a place that has minimal distractions. You don't want to sit down and then constantly be having people walk up to you and get your attention, or be in an environment that's loud or where they're screaming. You want to be in a place that is not going to be distracting you while you're trying to get work done. Also, you need good lighting, preferably white light. If you study in a place that has a lot of yellow light, your brain kind of associates that with going to sleep. It's a little harder to stay focused. And then make sure your phone is not within reach. Or if you're not addicted to your phone, which is probably not very many people, but everyone who watches this channel wouldn't be addicted to their phone, because you take the advice on this channel. But your phone, you need to make sure that it's out of reach. It's not in a spot where it's going to be dinging. It's not going to be notifying you, because all those things are going to pull you out of focus and make it harder to get ready. And also, don't study in your bed. Your bed is for sleeping. Your bed is not for studying. If you also there's this theory in psychology that your mind associates, and this has been proven, this is just accepted, this is true, that your mind associates certain locations with certain activities. Your bedroom is associated with sleeping and resting. It's not a good idea to go in there to be studying. So if you're a college student, get out of your room, go to the library, go to a coffee shop, go somewhere where you're not able to just either get distracted doing the laundry and all these other things, and you're not also able to sit in your bed, because your bed's for sleeping. Make sure that when you're working, you're in a spot that your mind is going to associate with work, so you're not fighting uphill. It's already hard to study and sit down and get focused. Don't make it that much harder on yourself by picking a bad environment. And also, if you're going to study, you need to pick the right time. Don't study when you're tired. Honestly, guys, I don't study at all when I'm tired. When I'm tired, I go to bed, and I'm in a different season now. PhD work isn't week to week where you have quizzes, at least in the classes I'm in right now. It's a lot of writing and extensive reading, but I'm never doing that when I'm tired. I might be doing it up late at night, but as soon as I get tired, I go to bed. I don't try to get stuff done when I'm tired, because also the kind of work that you do is, if it's a lot of reading and writing, then when you're tired, it's that much harder. And if that's all your program is, then you need to be focused whenever you sit down to do work. Maybe for you it's the morning, maybe for you it's the evening, but make sure that you're not trying to fight against your body saying, hey, I'm super sleepy, because then if you spend an hour studying and you're very, very sleepy, you're only getting 50% worth of your time. You're not actually learning as effective as if you were to do that earlier in the day. So make sure that your environment is a place that is helping you, not hurting you. And like I said, study when you're fresh, when you have plenty of sleep, and then study for a specific time. When you become a very advanced student, you can sit down and study and not really have an end time in mind. You can sit down and say, all right, I'm gonna work today, and when I'm done, I'm done. But that's a very advanced student. If you're struggling getting started with studying, then you need to start with 15, 30, 60 minutes, whatever the case. When I first started developing in the way that I studied, I used the Pomodoro method, because that's where you set a timer for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. And once I did that, what I found was every test required about the same amount of hours to study for me to get an A on the test. And once I knew that, that was a very freeing thing, because it was way less time than I had previously thought. I used to think, man, I studied for all this time to get whatever grade, and there was no system, so it caused me to put off that studying. But then when I learned it takes exactly this many hours to get ready for these tests, I was kind of excited to start, because I was like, oh, well, it's gonna take about this much time, and it was pretty consistent across the board. later on, now that I'm learning how to teach college classes, I've learned that the teachers think through how much time the assignments take. So that does make sense why it was pretty easy to see how much time was going to be required. But I learned that by setting a timer. If you're struggling with procrastination, you're struggling with studying, then set a time that you're going to be done. When you sit down and say, okay, I'm going to be done at this time, because that helps your mind have a little bit of closure that this thing that we're doing that's difficult, as your mind would think, you're not going to be doing it the rest of the day. And also that timer will create urgency. If you sit down and you say, I have 30 minutes to study this topic, go, and you hit a timer, and you're done when that timer is up, it creates an urgency and you're getting right into the studying instead of putting it off. And also, guys, remember Parkinson's law. This is a procrastination. It's helpful for people that put things off. And Parkinson's law says that work always expands to the time you give it. You wonder why you always find a way to get that paper in whenever the paper's due. It's because of this law. If you give yourself an hour, you're gonna tend to figure out how to get things done within that hour. And anyone who's been very constrained on time knows that this is true. So remember that when you're studying, give yourself an hour and hold yourself to it. Say, I wanna get this concept mastered in an hour, go. And that creates urgency. And then your work is also you're gonna be able to see, oh, it's 30 minutes through the timer and I'm only 10% through this section of content that I wanted to be through. And then you say, oh, I gotta speed up. Well, those little feelings are really important. If you don't work based on time, then it's very easy to forget about it. So, like I said, Parkinson's law, remember that, work always expands the time that you give it. And if you're trying to grow in your studying, remember the Pomodoro technique, which is where you pick one thing that you're gonna study, you study for 25 minutes, and then you take 5-minute breaks. Every 3 cycles, then you take like a 15 or 20-minute break, just a longer break. And those systems will really help you as you get into studying. And if you're stressed out about finals, put a plan together, do the Pomodoro method, remember Parkinson's law, and you're gonna be set up to not be stressed. You'll have a lot of closure when you start studying. Now you have a plan, but a plan alone is not enough. A plan is only as good as the execution that follows. And you wanna execute with very specific methods when you're studying. One of those is active recall. Most students, they study by sitting down, they passively read their notes, but guys, it doesn't work. The harder that your brain is working when you're studying, the more that you're learning. And if you're sitting down studying and it's not very intense and it's kind of just easy, and then you grab your phone every couple of minutes, you're not learning a lot per the time that you're putting in. And active recall is where you study based on questions and you try to answer the questions based on memory, even if you don't know the answer. And then when you don't know the answer, you check. And that is the best way to learn. And it is very freeing for students. I think that the reason that I haven't been super stressed about school is because I've constantly used active recall, because that's how your brain learns. Your brain learns when you don't know the answer, and then you go through that friction feeling. It's not comfortable, but you go through that friction feeling, and then you get the answer correct, or you don't know the answer and then you reveal the answer to your brain. This is why flashcards are so helpful. You probably know people, I know some friends that only ever used Quizlet through every single class all through college. When they study just based on looking at the question, trying to remember the question, and if they don't know it, then they reveal it to their brain. And again, you're locking in that answer when your brain has gone through the friction right before you reveal the answer to yourself. And then if you know the answer, then you just move on to the next one. That's why flashcards are so effective, because you're not passively reading the material. You see that, like for me, when I'm studying, if I'm studying Greek, I see agape, that's a common Greek word, and if I don't know what that word means, then my brain's like trying to remember. Well, then whenever I reveal the answer, then my brain's locking it in, I'm actually learning. So I see agape, I don't know what it means. The next time I come around, I'm like, oh yeah, it means love. And that is how your brain learns. That is very, very, very different than just reading through your notes. And I know students who, even some that got good grades, and they just read through their notes, but that is not the best use of your time. So you want to make sure that you're always using active recall. And then if you're studying really complex content, or you have to give a presentation for a class, then you want to use Feynman's technique. This is where it's still using active recall, but you pick a concept and then you try to teach it like you're teaching it to a beginner. Or when I first learned this law, the video said, teach it like you're teaching someone who's like 10 years old. So I would try to take these advanced concepts of how the Bible has been preserved in the ancient Hebrew manuscripts, and I would try to explain that to a 5-year-old. And what was nice is that method doesn't require me to write the answers down. I'm able to do the active recall a little bit quicker because when you're speaking, you get through content way quicker than when you're writing. So instead of practicing taking tests, which I used to do that was really, really helpful, I just write out questions. Then when you read the question, you try to answer it, you're doing active recall. But I would have to write out the answer and it would take me a second to write it out. But whenever I started using Feynman's technique where I was trying to explain the concept, I would find out where my gaps in knowledge were much quicker. And then whenever I would go back and relearn the material, I was able to kind of go through that cycle a little bit quicker. But remember, if you're studying, you want to be hitting these little zones where you're trying to think for 20 seconds or so and you can't get the answer. If you're not doing that, then you're not studying the most effective way. You want to be trying to spend that time thinking, let your brain go to work, trying to remember that material, and then whenever you, like I said, you reveal it to yourself, you satisfy your brain with the answer, it remembers it much better. Another thing you can use, I didn't like doing this, but I have friends who do, is group studying. I mentioned, one time when I was studying, I went with a group and we ended up eating cake and ice cream and we didn't study at all and we all took finals the next day. That was like my freshman year. So that didn't work out well for me, but I know others who really rely on other people showing up and then they're not having to study alone. Like I said, I don't think that hasn't been the best in my personal experience because everybody is at a different spot in their studying process. And if I have to backtrack 45 minutes or 2 hours in my process to help someone else learn the content, I don't think that's the best use of my time. But it can be very helpful to show up with a group and say, all right, we're all gonna study together. I know one guy on YouTube that they show up for group working sessions because they're all YouTubers and they are very creative in their role, but it's hard to just sit down and make yourself create. So they all get on a call and nobody says anything, but it's just like an accountability call. But the point is, it can really help to have other people involved helping you stick to your system. So group studying, if you haven't tried it before and you have a hard time making yourself work, you can do that. And also, like if you want to hang out with friends, but you also have to study, it's kind of a best of both worlds. Just depends on how you look at it. And you also want to have the right mindset. There are two types of students, okay? There's two. There are the people who think in a fixed mindset because they think, you know what? Either I'm just not good at this or the amount of knowledge that I have is fixed. I can't grow it. And then there are other people, you could call them people with a growth mindset. They think that they can improve if they put effort in. But once you realize and once you think of yourself in terms of a growth mindset, you are able to really do anything because you think that, you know what, I might not have a skill now, but I know how to control my behavior and I can get that skill if I want that skill. And that is very important when you're studying because if you think my knowledge is fixed, there's nothing I can do to change how smart I am or to change who I am, then why put the effort in logically? But when you realize that, you know what, I can grow, I can, neuroplasticity, I can push my brain and my brain will adapt to what I expect from it, man, you can become a completely different person. So remember this, guys, you can remove the stress. You don't have to be stressed out about finals. You need to make sure that you have a plan for your studying and then use the right methods. Active recall, Feynman's technique, study with a group if you're really having a hard time getting started, and remember, your mindset needs to be a growth mindset. You can change your brain and you can expect more things from your brain, and if you hold yourself to it, your brain will develop, and things that are really hard now will be easier in the future, and you won't be super stressed out about exams like you've always been so far. I hope this video helped you, and if it did, consider subscribing, maybe send it to a friend. We talk about productivity from a Christian perspective here, and if you want to know more about habits, I really like talking about that. I have a video on the channel about habits and how you can build them, and then also I have a video about procrastination and how you can learn to really hijack your brain so that you don't procrastinate anymore. If you want to watch that video, click the link above, and we'll see you guys in the next one.